Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is Cop Talk, talking crime, cases, and backing the blue. Now, here are your hosts, Captain Ed Mamet and Detective Kevin Schroeder.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cop Talk. My name is Kevin Schroeder, retired NYPD detective, and I'm here with my co-host, retired Captain Ed Mamet. Say hello, Ed.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with our distinguished guests and my buddy, Kevin.
Thank you, Ed. Today, we're very fortunate to have two special guests. One is James Patterson, and the other is Matthew Eversmann. They are the writers of a great new book that's out called Walk the Blue Line. And they're the authors of this book. And as we know right now, I would say James Patterson's probably the biggest author on this planet. And he sold almost 500 million copies of this book. It's a great book. And Matt is a retired first sergeant from the U.S. Army Rangers, actually U.S. Army Rangers. And thank you, Matt, for your service. And you're a true hero. On behalf of all law enforcement, I'd like to thank both these right now for writing this book. And on that note, let's get right to it. So, gentlemen, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, this is actually the third that we've done in a series. It started with a book called Walk in My Combat Boots, which Matt and I put together. And our mission for Walk in My Combat Boots and for Walk the Blue Line is the same, that the men and women who, in this case, walk the blue line, that they would read this and say, Eversmann and Patterson got it right. And that people who don't really understand the police would read it and finally go, I understand now. I didn't understand before, but I'm finally beginning to understand. And that's our real hope, that people will get it. You know, I just read a thing. I didn't read the whole thing, but it was in the New York Times yesterday in a magazine section. And it was about Louisville and what happened down there. And look, that's a tragedy. We don't want anybody to get murdered that shouldn't get murdered. But nobody sits there and goes, the real problem is Louisville. Louisville is the problem. You know, Matt knows this. I mean, Mogadishu or Kabul or Baghdad or whatever, we don't blame the soldiers for the city. Right. We praise them for going into these terrible situations and doing the best they can, you know. And that's one of the things that people need to understand, we think, about the police around this country.
Very true, James. And how did you pick the cops whose stories are featured in this book?
Matt?
Yeah, so we had some good help all the way around. And, you know, like any of these good stories, they start with one or two. And, you know, as you all both know, within your, you know, this culture, you know, ask a cop if he's got a buddy and he's got 5 and they've got 5. And, you know, we talked with the FOP. We had some great support from some other law enforcement organizations that all, you know, everybody was so excited to help share stories when they learned that, you know, James Patterson was the mastermind of this operation. And I got to tell you, we spent about 8 months, Jim, I think it was about 8 months doing interviews.
Yeah, there are 7,000 pages of interviews for this book, which we, you know, obviously that would be a little too long as a book. So, and what we did, and I think this is part of what makes the book work as well as it does, at least in our opinion, is we take the interviews and then we would bring them into 5 or 6 pages or so for each police officer. And that keeps them interesting. So you'd learn about that person very quickly and then some of their stories.
Ed?
Well, you had some very, very interesting stories that I could relate to after 40 years experience. I'm sure Kevin can. There was one particular story that really got to me. In one of your stories, one of your subjects was involved in a shooting, and somebody from the media said to him something like, "How does it feel to kill someone?" Or
Yeah, isn't that
shoot someone?
amazing? Yeah. What an asshole. It's unbelievable that people, it's just astonishing. One of the things I stopped that very quickly because it's such a sore point. I mean, for you guys and for Matt and I, we would love that everybody in the media would read the damn book. It won't get reviewed by the New York Times, which is absurd. It was all over Fox. Finally, we got it on CNN with Jake Tapper. And the people that need to hear this stuff are not going to hear it. And if you understood police at all, you would never say what that reporter said. You would never say that. Someone's just almost lost their life or in a terrible situation. It's the last thing you would say.
Well, let me give you an example that I remember vividly from 60 years ago. I came in the police department in 1959. I was a young cop, and I worked in a pretty tough neighborhood. And we had a police officer. By the way, his name was Joseph Gallo. Not Joseph Gallo, the gangster, but Joe Gallo, the cop.
That's good.
Joe Gallo shot and killed someone. And Gay Pressman, I don't know if you remember Gay Pressman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Gay Pressman had just started out as a street TV reporter because back in 1959, 1960, street reporting for TV was pretty new. And he showed up on the scene, and I was there. And he said to Joe, he said, "Would you do it again if you had to?" And I almost fainted. I said, what a stupid question. If they ask a cop, he just killed someone, and he's asking, "Would you do it again if you had to?" And that shows you the insensitivity of some of these news media. They couldn't care less. They ask these dumb questions.
They just don't understand it. And you're going to write about something you should understand. I mean, Matt and I understand a whole lot better. We don't understand. I told Matt before when we did the walk in my combat boots, initially I said, I understand, soldiers now. And then at a certain point, I said to him, I said, that's baloney because I have never shot at anyone and I've never been shot at. So I don't really understand, but I understand it a lot better than I did.
I always say, fellas, that, police officers in a situation is a split-second decision to make.
Yeah.
I hope it's the right decision. 99% of the time, it is the right decision. But they had a split-second decision to make. However, all these bosses and politicians and critics sit around a table for weeks, months, and years to figure out if you made the right decision. Well, you only had a split second. They've got months to figure out maybe another way you could have gone. It's as if there's a take two, a script. This isn't a movie. It's real time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been on a bunch of ride-alongs with the books and stuff. And Matt and I went on one down here. And the sheriff who was taking us around, he said, he said, in that county, the previous year, there had been over 1 million calls for help just in that county. So, the volume is unbelievable. And even people who say, stay away when there's a problem, please come fast, But the other thing is, and I don't know what they call this, but when they go in and they give you that experience, and they bring in private citizens, they say, here's the gun, here's the situation. You've got a couple of seconds to decide. If they go through that, they understand something they didn't understand before. And everybody in the media, if you're going to write about it, go do that because it's going to change how you write.
You're talking about the simulated firing range.
Yes.
Yeah, we've done that here in New York. We did that. We brought some of these politicians, and they were shocked. Yeah. They got shot multiple times.
Yeah, or shot somebody that they didn't. Right. I'm sorry, you just shot the nanny there.
That was quite an eye opener for them.
Yeah.
How hard was it for you to get to cops to open up, or was it easy?
I got to tell you, they were shockingly forthright. I mean, truly, most all of them were very, and I like to think, that they had a little bit of trust and confidence given, my background, knowing that they're talking to a guy who's been in a fight. And again, I don't mean that pat myself on the back, but, they got in, they started going, and very few of them were reticent to talk. In fact, I don't know, Jim, we got, I'd do the transcribing and then bring it over to Jim, and he'd see these 50-page interviews. And you put a quarter in a cop, they like to talk.
Yeah, I say, Matt, can you shut them down a little bit? 50 pages is too much on this one,
And if I could just throw in too, Kevin, one of the things though that unlike, this is sort of a 1-2 punch. But one of the things that I found interesting was that not every one of the cops would talk about mental wellness and post-traumatic stress. But the ones that did were very, very, very open, much like the soldiers, so it really jumped out at me and Jim how, soldiers have had a big focus on mental health and PTSD. And, the doggone cops have had so little focus on that. And consequently, not that many would talk about it. But the ones that did seem to be getting good help.
Yeah, there's a reason for that, I believe. That I think that cops hold a lot in. They don't want to tell their family about what they've seen. They don't want to tell others. They feel like no one really understands them. And when someone lends a sympathetic ear, guys like you, and they start to feel this trust, they'll open up. It's really catharsis. It's getting it out, makes them feel better. I know I've experienced it myself.
Yeah. We found that.
Sometimes cops too may have a situation, as we're speaking about, they don't want to speak about it in the open or to their supervisors because they're afraid of, maybe being put on light duty or guns taken away and you have to take a time out for a while,
Yeah. Kevin, that's why in some cases we just identify somebody with the first name or whatever, because they asked for it to be that way. Not that people did bad things, but that, it wouldn't necessarily be to their benefit. But that's something that's going to have to change. And people, and almost everybody we talked to said the changes have to happen, and that's one of them. Yeah. Police, they just need to evolve. They need to understand. Like Matt has talked about. Oh, look, here's a guy. Matt was actually the sergeant portrayed in the movie Black Hawk Down, so he's seen heavy stuff in his life. And well, go ahead, Matt. Why don't you talk about that part of it and the fact, the everydayness of being a cop versus being in combat?
Yeah, man. And this kind of piggybacks on what Jim said earlier. I thought I knew a little bit about being a cop just from the knucklehead gun to gun conversation. But what I realized, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't see this coming, was that, we soldiers deploy, certainly for the last 20-some years, deploy for 3, 6, 8, 12 months. Then we come back and refit and regroup and sometimes wait a year and a half, and then go again. But with you all, you're deployed from the day you get your badge and your sidearm until the day you leave the force. And I'm embarrassed that it took me to interview and listen to realize you're stuffing an awful lot into that doggone backpack that all cops are carrying. And I'm embarrassed about just that fact. We can't even comprehend, from the biggest gunfight in Mogadishu or Kandahar or anything. Yeah, that's one thing for a certain amount of time, but you guys do it on Monday, you got to come back and do it on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's shocking to me that someone could vilify the profession that's so noble at protecting us.
Not only that, but when you're off duty, you're technically on duty. Most departments require that you carry your firearm and your identification even when off duty, and that you take action when you're off duty. Yeah. So that's another thing that has to be recognized.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now, suicide is very high with law enforcement personnel. I know recently NYPD, I believe in the last 6 months, just lost 3 young kids young adults to suicide.
Yeah, and on some, I don't want to knock the media too much, but to some extent, that's on the media too. You got to tell those stories. Cop just killed in Chicago over the weekend, was it? Whatever, and we don't hear about it. We need to hear about those stories. People need to understand. We did an interview the other day, and they had done a bunch of interviews. This, I think, back in 2020. And they literally talked to people who call themselves liberals and other people who call themselves conservatives. And they said, well, how many shootings have there been where, I don't want to be racial about the thing, but where blacks have been shot by the police? And some of the liberals were going like 1,000, I don't know. And that year there were 13. And that's no good. I mean, but it's going to happen. You get people out there with guns and other people with guns. Somebody's going to get shot occasionally. And it doesn't justify it or rationalize it. Nobody wants that to happen. But people just don't, there's no context to what's going on out there. And that's just ridiculous.
That brings up another question I was going to ask you. Did you get any feedback from the anti-cop crowd?
Yeah, some. And some of it isn't, like on Amazon or one of those, you can review the book or you can just put in a rating. The reviews, it's like 4.8 stars, okay? The ratings where they can just, who haven't read the book and just give it a 1 star, A whole bunch of people give it a 1 star because it's a book about the police. The whole thing. I mean, if people take the New York Times, the bestseller list, like it's supposed to be factual, you would think, right? So the first week, it doesn't get on the list, which is a little unusual for me. And I look at the numbers because Little Brown has them. And actually, it was the number 3 best-selling nonfiction. And it was quintuple, like the bottom 6 books on their list. And you go, what the hell is this all about? This is absurdity. We then, call them up, and I don't, but the publisher does. But I think it's because it was a cop book. And then like last week, suddenly it's number 5. Well, that week, it sold like a third of the books it sold the first week. So that just goes to show the list is cockeyed. And I don't know for sure, but I think it was because it was a book about cops, that's just nuts.
I mean, it sounds like you have many stories, as you said. There was many stories you had to go through to pick the right ones for the book.
Yeah.
That said, do you think there'll be a volume 2 with all the stories you still have?
It's possible. It's possible. We haven't gotten that far. We're doing teachers next, or we're one of the next ones. But, one of the things I think that makes the thing so readable, and it's, once again, it's not Matt or I, it's just the way people express themselves. Like you had one cop and it went into the neighborhood and they're going, you guys don't care. You guys don't care. And he said to the people, he said, if I didn't care, why would I be standing here in the freezing rain at 4 a.m? It just doesn't make sense. Wake up. And a lot of people expressing themselves in that way, memorable ways. And we didn't set out to do this, but there's 4 times more action in this book than there is in an Alice Cross thriller. There's just a lot of, some of the stories. There's one woman, she'd only been a detective for a brief time. This is daylight. She went on a drug bust and she sees action by the garage. She goes out to the garage. 2 guys start shooting at her. She kills both of these guys and she gets shot 10 times. And since then, she's been on a job for 17 years,
Yeah.
right, Mike? You're not Mike. You're Matt.
Close enough. Close. I look like a Mike. I could be. And, just to that point on that story, if I could just throw in a little color commentary, she talked about this engagement. As you all can imagine, it's 4 feet away across the hood of a car. And you would think she would be getting into it like a soldier talking about a firefight. And she was so, I almost say mild-mannered about it. She's just like, Matt, my training took over and it was this, and I thought this, and, when I'd never shot someone, and when it happened, I thought he would go, doing cartwheels all over the place. And she described it just so routinely. I mean, all I could think about is like, man, this woman's got ice water in her veins and she is a total pro, which I think represents the force. Certainly most that I if not all that I talked to, they are professional.
Right. Well, with that story, she only thought there may have been one shooter. There was 2 shooters in that story, correct? In the garage, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
two shooters, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. 2 shooters.
She took care of one, and then there was another one coming at her. Right?
Yeah.
As I recall, she didn't realize how many times she was shot.
No.
It was
She
only
thought she was
afterward
grazed, I think. Yeah.
Only afterward that she realized that she had multiple bullet wounds.
Yeah. 10 is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're drowning. You just keep going and going.
Getting to the lighter side of his stories, one of them I got a chuckle out of was the military police officer who stops the general on the military base for speeding, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when he realizes he's a general, he figures, oh my God, this is it. It's all over for me. And then the general sends him a commendation or something.
Yeah.
Like that was a great
he said
story.
you were right. Yeah. Some of the stuff is heartwarming, which is also good. I mean, there's one guy and he would go into the local coffee shop and sometimes in his SWAT stuff, and the baristas would come out and give him a hug. Or there was another guy and he had been trying to counsel an addict, a woman who was an addict. I think this was in California. And it wasn't working. It just wasn't making it. It was disappointing to him. And then years later, this woman comes up to him and she says, I was that addict and I'm graduating from college now. And would you please come to my college graduation? Which is so cool, and that's a little piece of the job too, or maybe a big piece of the job in a lot of ways.
Jim, I was going to say to that point, and I don't know why, this is the first time I'm saying it out loud. I think that just about everyone we interviewed had a very human story. And when I say human, it wasn't putting a handcuff on somebody. It wasn't getting into a tussle. It wasn't a fight, but they all had they would all say routine. It was finding the lost literally dog or a grandmother or like, you know, just taking the extra time to know somebody in the community. And some of them are like notorious gang people that these cops are like, hey, you know what? They're going to get to know me and I'm going to get to know them. And people don't know that. We don't know. We just think all the bad, and I say we, everybody but Jim and Matt, but you know, the people just seem to think bad things and they don't realize the good that you all do just on a daily basis.
The old expression is no one loves a cop until they need one.
Yeah.
In some of these towns too, that, you know, that these police officers are writing from, is their stories, they're telling their stories from, you know, their backup maybe 10, 15 minutes away, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
so you gotta hold up a good fight till your backup gets there. You know, it's not like a big city where you have 6 radio cars there in 2 minutes. You know, it's maybe 10 miles away is your backup. You're riding alone, so it's tough. It's tough in some of these areas down south.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting in some neighborhoods in big cities and some towns where the neighbors and the neighborhoods and the cops have worked it out. There is some respect going back and forth within reason. You know, the town understands why the cops are there up to a point, you know, and that's what needs to happen, you know, where it can happen. But more than anything else, people need to realize that some of these neighborhoods, some of these, or half the city is just a freaking mess. We, you know, Memphis, we didn't interview anybody from Memphis, but Memphis always came up when we would talk to cops from the South. And they just said that the town, not the whole town, but parts of that town are just a mess. And that's what the story should be about. All right, you know, they start and they tell, okay, here's a tragedy, shouldn't have happened, blah, 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 blah. And now, instead of just repeating that story for the next 3 weeks with the same information, how about talking about Memphis and what the hell's going on there? How did that happen? What's going on in that town, you know?
Yeah, but the news media would rather talk about the Scorpion unit.
But that's not journalism, man. That's just sloppy, crummy, mindless, no imaginations, no brains. It's just not, it should not happen. It's just, and I don't care whether you're writing about cops or food. I mean, do your damn job, you know? They just don't do their job.
Well, it probably, you know, the Scorpion unit was created to address the high crime problem in Memphis.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And then what happens is they do such a good job, they get out of control and they go overboard. So I've seen this happen before in police work where there's a particular problem, a special unit is created. And then what happens is if you don't control that special unit who think they're elitists, you have problems. So that's not.
No, the vigilante thing doesn't work anywhere. Yeah.
No, it doesn't help a lot of these big city police departments lowering their standards to come on the job.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, recruitment and retainment is tough right now. It's hard to recruit.
Yes.
Nobody wants to take the job where you get paid not much. I mean, here's a job, law enforcement, where police officers get paid, you know, a lot less than, you know, people wouldn't do this job for $1 million. Cops do it for a lot less. And so, you know, you can't expect, you know, I know with NYPD, a lot of guys go to different departments because of the pay scale. They feel like they get treated much better and they get paid well, let's say in Nassau County versus New York City, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know? That's the fact. That's the truth.
You know, picking up on that, are you gentlemen aware that the commanding officer of the New York City Police Academy in the last few days said she wants to lower the physical requirement, that they don't have to do the 1.5 mile run so that they can get more women in the job. And this is from what I read, it was against the opinion of the police commissioner. Now, the commanding officer of the police academy works for the police commissioner. So you have her, they're both female. And it's a ridiculous situation. If you lower the standards, I mean, what are you going to have? The idea was to get more women in the department because they can't make the run, according to this commanding officer, whose name is Juanita Holmes. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this?
No. Well, I can't run 1.5 miles, so I'm not. I can't comment on that one.
Right, but you're talking about recruits.
I know. I'm kidding.
In the early 20s, you know.
Yeah. But 1.5 miles is not. That's not that far. So yeah.
Well, actually, it's 1.4 miles.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's not really that hard. But the point is, you can't keep lowering these standards because then you're gonna have corruption in the police departments. If you really lower the standards, you're not sure who you're gonna be hiring.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the issues with Memphis too, where I think they've been lowering the standards for a long time. I don't know. I have no idea, but that particular 5 guys, but the standards are definitely not what they should be.
James and Matt, you're military personnel, but James, this question is to you. With writing this book, Have it changed your mind in regards to law enforcement, what they really go through day to day?
You hear me, man. You hear me being emotional here. Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, what we try to do in all these books, the Walk My Combat Boots, this one, and then we did one on ER nurses, is that people would understand something that they think they understand, but they don't understand. And it's crucial. You know, law and order is such a big deal in this country, and it should be right now. And doing right by cops and understanding what they're doing. And also, you know, and things need to change as well. But none of that happens if people don't understand. And this book, if you read this book, you will understand. And also, we've gotten a lot of back from law enforcement officers and families who have read it, especially families, because a lot of times you mentioned it, Kevin and Ed, they won't talk to their families about what they're doing. The families read this thing and they go, "Oh, I finally understand, Dad, what you do." You know, so that's useful too.
Well, it's a great book, Walk the Blue Line. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming on. I know you're very busy, and thank you on behalf of all law enforcement personnel. Thank you. Okay, and thank you for being on Cop Talk, Ed.
Yes, it was a pleasure meeting you fellows, and I hope you continue your great work.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for having us on. Thank you,
Matt.
Matt.
Thanks for your service.
Always.
Thank you, Matt.
I like the glasses, man. I like them. I don't know.
You're the best guy I've talked to today, Jim. Thank you.
See you guys.